Good morning, everybody. How you doing? Good to see you. Happy Thursday, right? Today's Thursday. Let these guys get going. So I'd like to just start off by asking a couple questions. How many of you are in the middle of doing strategic planning or thinking about starting a strategic plan for your organization? Okay, about half of you, about 3/4 of you. How many of you have never had a strategic plan? Yeah? Okay, good, good. That's good too. I'm glad you're here because you're going to learn a lot of good stuff today. Even if you are in the middle of it, some fundamentals around strategic planning and why it matters for your organization, how it can help you move from the level you are now to the next level, which is, I think, what everybody probably wants, right? So good. So we've got a good mix of folks here today. I think one of the things I'd like to tell you is that I like to have a conversation. I like this to be interactive. So I would like to ask you to interrupt me at any time if you want to ask a question. I don't want to be the only one talking today, okay? I think we learn better in an environment where we have conversation and dialogue. And so I encourage that today. So before we get started, I'll tell you just a brief story about a time when I was working at an organization. I asked our board chair, I said, we need a strategic plan for this organization. I think the last one that had been done was maybe 7 years old. And it was really outdated, and nobody, of course, was really even paying any attention to it or knew anything about that for that matter, or where it was, okay? And so this happens. I get it. I've been there myself. And so I said to the board chair, I said, we need to get a strategic plan in place so that we can start thinking about where our focus is. And he poo-pooed the idea. He just said, He said, I think it's a waste of time. It'll just sit on a shelf somewhere and we won't pay any attention to it. And after I picked my jaw off the floor, I don't even remember what he said or what I said to him. I think I was just so dumbfounded that somebody had that thought. He's probably not the only one who said that, though, because I think sometimes board members have this experience that, hey, if we invest this time and this money into doing a strategic plan, with our staff, and we're not really paying any attention to it a year after, or not even a year after, or 2 years or 3 years, what are we to do? Hi.
Is that while are you having any distraction from the other side?
It's not bothering me. Is it bothering you guys? I mean, we can kind of hear them, but it's not distracting us.
All right, I just want to make
Yeah.
sure.
Okay. If it is distracting, let me know, and we can do something, I suppose. I'm not an expert on wall insulation, but I'll find somebody who is. So again, I don't remember what my reaction was to that, but I think I was just awestruck that somebody thought this is not something that this institution needs. And I think I was saying that it may not be that uncommon with some board members, because the one thing I want everybody to remember today is that you're not strategic planning experts, probably, right? Is there any experts in the room on strategic planning? Okay, good, good. Don't feel bad. Most people aren't. I only consider myself an expert because I've been doing it for 30 years and I teach it and I instruct on it, and so I feel like I probably should be an expert and very knowledgeable in that area. So it's not something that's common to us. What do we do? How do we do it? When do we do it? Why do we do it? What are all these things? What are all the components that go into a plan? How do we use it to help our organization improve? Do you know all those answers? I didn't when I started working with strategic plans, so there's a lot to it. And I'm going to kind of debunk some myths around strategic planning today, but I'm also going to give you some very basic things I think that will help you. When you think about strategic planning, and I think the thing I thought of when that board chair said that is, how do we know where we're going if we don't have a map, a plan, a vision for the future of this organization? How do we know what we're supposed to focus on? What about mission creep? It's not uncommon for organizations, especially boards, to have a lot of ideas. And some of them are really, really good. But do they align with our mission? Who's gut checking that in the process to make sure that that idea is going to align with what we're supposed to be doing as an organization. It may be a great idea, but it may not align with what our priorities are. But how do you know what your priorities are if you haven't talked about them and decided these are our priorities? And anything that's introduced as an idea or an opportunity for our organization needs to be vetted against those priorities first, right? Before we just say, yeah, let's do that. Let's go raise some money. So the strategic plan really gives you guidance and balance. But the key to a successful strategic plan is maintenance. Okay, and what I mean by that is it has to be managed. So in your organization, who do you think should be managing or owning the strategic plan? Anybody? How many? Okay, let's do this. How many think it's the executive director? Okay. How many think it's the board? Okay, about half and half. It's really first the board. Okay? The strategic plan is the board's body of work. And so if you have a board member that says, oh, we don't need to do that because we're not going to do anything with it, well, fire that board member. Second of all, that is their body of work. This is what the board should be focused on. Okay? And quite common in smaller nonprofits, the board is involved in a lot of the day-to-day operations, oftentimes because the organization needs that help. They're limited on resources. They're limited on fundraising tactics and people to help them fundraise, right? Sound familiar a little bit? So that's what you call a working board, okay? But what we also need is a governing board. So when you're a board of directors, you have governance responsibilities. You have legal responsibilities, okay? And one of them is to ensure the success of the institution. So when you're doing that, you're responsible, the board is responsible for the review annually, or actually probably every other year, of all of your official documents, your bylaws, your code of conduct, your conflict of interest policies. All these different things should be reviewed on a regular basis by the board. The board's role is governance. And underneath that governance is the strategic plan. So they should be leading and regularly monitoring this plan that you have or are soon to have so that to ensure that the success of the organization continues to grow, right? So that's kind of a high-level overview. So we're going to talk for a minute about why strategic plans matter, because I kind of led with that in my story. You know, that board member didn't get it. They didn't understand it. Why? So I think I'd like to start with that, okay? So let me tell you a little bit about our organization first. Our firm is called CORE Consulting. It's not C-O-R. It's called CORE. And basically, we do a lot of different things for institutions. Of course, strategic planning is one of them. We do a lot of work with major gift and capital gift type campaigns for institutions. We do executive searches for people that are organizations that are looking for their next leader in their organization. And we do a lot of fund development strategy as well. But I personally have over 30 years of experience in strategic planning. I've done a lot of strategic plans, so I have a lot of background and information and knowledge about that. I'm a certified fundraising executive. That's a certification, just like you get your CPA or something of that nature. And essentially what having that credential means is that I hold myself and those that I work with to the highest ethical and professional standards of fundraising and nonprofit leadership. And I think that's important today, don't you? Ethics is important in nonprofit because I'm sure you've heard a lot of stories about things that have gone wrong in nonprofits. And when it happens to one organization, it affects us all. It affects us all. There was a scandal in Charlotte many years ago where the CEO of the United Way was being scrutinized for some of their expenditures, which were, in the opinion of a lot of people, and the front page of the Observer, were a little bit opulent, or a lot opulent. And they were raising, I think, around $45 million a year before that situation started. And it didn't go very well. And what happened was the executive director sued the organization. And ultimately what happened was she was fired after a long time of inaction by the board. So what's happened since then is the following year they raised $19 million. Okay? And a lot of people said, I'm not giving to United Way anymore. Well, fine. I'm going to redirect my giving to other organizations. You know, that happened more in theory than it did in actuality. But the impact was a wave across all nonprofits because of the ethical dilemma that the United Way was in with some of these expenditures. And so that's why it's so important. Ethics in nonprofit fundraising and in nonprofit leadership is crucial. So I'm one of those nut jobs that loves strategic planning. I do think it's fun. I think there's a lot of good that goes into a strategic plan. And we'll try to have some fun today, and I'll tell you some of the ins and outs of strategic planning. So let's jump into it. Why do we strategically plan? First of all, we want to affirm. We want to affirm what we're doing right and address any gaps or areas of concern. That's really important. You want to know what you're doing right, because what you're doing right, you want to carry forward, right? You want to continue that practice or that habit. And if there are any gaps or areas of concern, then those are things that you want to measure. And you want to look at, well, maybe we don't need to do that anymore, or maybe this is an issue that is going to bubble up again in one of our other assessments as we go through the strategic planning process. We also want to identify ways to enhance the engagement level of board and staff. Okay, so typically when we work with a client, we like to do some assessments internally with the staff and internally with the board. And you'd be amazed at what you can find out from just doing some type of assessment like that with your leadership and your staff. It really helps identify some areas, again, some gaps or some opportunities that could help increase the engagement of your board and staff as well as the performance. And that's really important. And you do want to address that in the planning process. You don't want to pretend it doesn't exist or you're hiding behind it. So you also want to pinpoint what the vision and future success looks like for the organization. Okay, what does the future look like? Is it doing the same thing we're doing now? Or is it, gosh, we really wish that we could be doing this, or I really wish we added that program? This is your opportunity to dream, to really look forward to what's going to be, what's going to help catapult your organization forward. Okay? Don't forget that people that support your organization love a vision too. And if you're excited about it and you can portray that excitement to them, they're going to get excited about that. And when donors get excited, what happens, John? When donors get excited about a vision, what do? They give more money. They give more money. And that's what you want, right? So that's another benefit to the strategic plan. It excites your base, the people that love you. It excites your board. And that's probably even more important. Because how do you get a board excited these days? Right? You know, they need to be fired up with enthusiasm. So how do we get them enthused? Well, you give them a vision. You give them a plan. You give them a body of work to do. I think the most common complaint I hear about from organizations and their board and their complacency is that they just don't know what they should be doing. What are they supposed to be working on? You know, what can we give them to do? Give them the strategic plan and let them manage it. And let them ensure that they're keeping those metrics and we're reporting out on them and that we're identifying if we're not meeting a goal, why? Do we need to pivot? Do we need to change that goal or change that direction or focus instead on some other type of initiative or goal? But this, again, is the board's body of work, and the strategic plan will inspire them and get them enthused and get them back engaged again in your organization. And that's critical. We also plan because we want to establish the proper goals and targets. Again, it goes back to how do we know where we're going if we don't have the plan? Well, this gives you the direction. So you'll have goals. You'll have measurable objectives that support those goals, and then you'll have tactics. How are we going to do it? And we'll talk a little bit more about the difference between a goal, an objective, and a tactic later on. And lastly, we strategically plan because it guides what we're going to be doing and addresses any gaps, areas of concern. So it is your guide, it is your roadmap, okay? And it should not be put on the shelf, okay? This should be reviewed on a regular basis by your board and, of course, the leadership of the organization, okay? So let me pause for a second and see if there are any questions or thoughts about that. All make sense? Yes?
I really liked what you said about strategic planning being the responsibility of the board.
Mm-hmm.
I immediately thought it was going to be my responsibility because I'm used to a board that's not very active.
Yeah.
So my question would be, how do you know your board is ready for a strategic plan? Ready to manage that successfully?
The question was, how do you know your board's ready to go through the strategic planning process? I think we're going to get into some of this. I think, we'll talk about how we identify why it's important, why it matters. But I think talking about these first 5 things is a really good start. It's a really good place to start with your board because sometimes we need them to be convinced it's a good idea so that it becomes their idea, right? So, and I think another, may I ask your name? Rebecca, thanks for the question. So one thing that I have learned over my time in nonprofit leadership is that the board needs to know what we need them to do. And so I understand the dynamic between an executive director and the board. It is an interesting dynamic. I've been in that position before. And so we want to be careful about how we say things to the board because ultimately they're our boss, right? But the longer I've been in nonprofit leadership, the less apologetic I am for what I tell the board I need from them, okay? Don't forget, the board are volunteers. They don't know how to be board volunteer members most of the time. They've never been trained on how to be a good board member or what it means to be an effective board member for your institution. So we need to help them. We need to train them. We need to tell them, this is what I need you to do. And so Rebecca, my suggestion is, yes, these 5 things to kind of prime them and say, these are the things I think are going to really matter to our organization and why it matters to us and why it's going to help us. But we need to tell them, I need you to make sure that you communicate this to the board that this is important. Because who do the board members listen to primarily, besides the executive director? Who's their boss? The board chair. So this is a common dynamic where we have the executive director who knows what needs to be done and knows where we need to go. And they're the one that's telling the board what to do. But ultimately, you need your board chair to be saying that stuff for you, okay? Can you do it? Yeah, you probably do it now all the time. But what we really need is that board chair to step up and lead, okay? So it's having conversations with your board chair and saying, here's where we need to be. You could ask, what do you think? But I don't know if that's as important as, you know what you need. You're leading the organization. They hired you because they need you to lead the organization. So like I said, I'm less apologetic than I ever have been in my life when I talk to the board because I think they just need to know what you need. If you don't, they don't know. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think as we go through this more, we're going to come up with some more answers for you. Okay? Who else? Let's go ahead and we'll keep going. So where do we start? What are we going to need to succeed with creating a strategic plan? Well, first of all, you want to review your previous plan if you have one. Okay? And why do you want to do that? Well, for a few reasons. Number one, you want to identify objectives or tactics that weren't completed. And you want to dig a little deeper on that and say, well, why didn't we? Is it still relevant? Maybe not. Maybe that's why it wasn't completed. Or did we not have enough resources to do that? Well, maybe that's a big red flag that we need to identify. We didn't do this, but this is part of our original plan. And I really wished we had, but we just didn't have this, or we just didn't have the energy to do it, or we just didn't have the resources to do it. Identify the why and write it down so that when it comes time to do some of these other assessments that you'll do during the process, you'll come back to that and you'll say, you know what? we need to pay attention to that. And that's an outlier. That's something that we didn't complete that we may want to consider for our next plan. And then come up with some actual tactics about how to solve it. Okay? Do any of those items carry over to the new plan? And then what processes worked and what didn't work in achieving the plan? So this is a really good, anybody ever done a program review after you finish a program or an event? Same thing. Do a review of your strategic plan and look at what worked and what didn't work, and try to answer that why question. And I think that'll take you a long ways. Okay? Talk to your leadership. So this is what we were talking about just a moment ago when Rebecca asked her question. You know, I think it's important that you do have a conversation with your staff and you talk to them about, hey, you know, we're talking about strategic planning, or we're in the middle of a strategic plan. What's going well? What's not going well? What do we need? What's your vision for the future? And do that with your staff, your leadership, and your board. You need to solicit that buy-in for renewing the planning process if you have one, or for starting it. And that goes in line with what we were talking about as far as telling them the why, and some of those first comments that we had, the why. Here's why it's going to be important. And then identifying the timing and design to launch the plan. How long is it going to take you? How much time do you have to do it? Okay? You've got to get your leadership on board, or it's not going to be a very good process. Then you need to talk about, well, who's going to do it? Are you going to have somebody internally who's going to have time to manage the process? Who is that person going to be? Is it you? Will you share that responsibility with somebody? Do we need to have or hire an outside expert to help us with that process? Again, I know not everybody's an expert at strategic planning, so sometimes bringing that external knowledge can be extremely valuable to the process to make sure to keep you on track and to make sure that you know the difference between goals, objectives, tactics, etc. Which board members do you want on the planning committee? Okay, what external friends and partners would be of value? You know, I think it's important to have your internal leadership, but also some external leadership on that committee, because they bring in different perspective than internal. You know, if you have strictly people from within the organization, you can be a little bit boxed in with that internal knowledge or how we've always done things. So having an external voice can be really valuable and get us to think about things in different ways. So I like doing that. I think it's really important. But it's going to be really important for you to identify who's going to do it and how much time is it going to take and how long will it take. Just a few words of advice about hiring a consultant. Make sure you agree on the length of the engagement with them. There's got to be a start and a stop time. I've seen plans that have gone on for 1.5 years. It's hard. No board member, no staff member, no leader of the organization wants to spend 1.5 years trying to create a strategic plan. It's just too long. You've got to try to box it in. Typically, our process takes about 6 to 7 months, okay? And it sounds like a lot, but you have to remember that there's work to be done in between meetings. There's analysis that needs to be done. There's the collection of information and documents internally that support the information that the board's going to need. Assessments, internal assessments, external assessments, comparative analysis with other institutions that are like yours. And maybe you could learn some things from them that they're doing differently or more intriguing. Find out what your responsibilities are and their responsibilities are. Make sure that they document that. What are you supposed to be doing internally? What are your responsibilities going to be, and what are they going to be doing for you? What types of evaluations will be done? I mentioned that a little bit earlier about evaluations. You know, we like to interview a lot of different people, and I think getting the staff's input isn't integral. I think the board's input is integral, but I also think asking some of your community leaders for their input is also equally valuable, because again, it brings in that outside perspective. Identify the staff and board and time commitment involved. Again, that's really important. Some of the feedback I've heard over the years is, well, I didn't realize it was going to be this much work. And sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't, but you have to prepare them for it. Typically, a strategic plan is not complicated work, but there is work. And if you set the expectation properly ahead of time and let them know how many assessments we're going to do, approximately how much time it's going to take for them to complete the assessment or to help create a spreadsheet to collect all that data, then it's a little bit easier. They knew what the time commitment was up front. And then lastly, what will be the components of the plan? What's it going to look like? So these are some things that you want to ask when you're talking to somebody about possibly helping you or assisting you with a plan. Questions? All right. Round of coffee for everybody. I want to get some questions going here in a minute, all right? So this is a really hard chart to read, and I apologize for it. I was going to try to simplify this before we had our meeting today, but I wasn't able to. So I'll just kind of explain to you what this process looks like. Typically, your first 2 to 3 months is going to be what I call gathering. Okay, so you're gathering information, you're doing a SWOT analysis. A SWOT is a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis. And that's looking at what you're really good at, what are some things that aren't going so well, and what are some opportunities that we should be considering for the future of the organization. I think a board self-assessment is a really good thing at this time if you're looking at strategic planning. Ask the board how they think they're doing, as an individual board member and as a whole, as a board. And you can get some really valuable feedback and data from that process. If your board is not very effective, this is a really good way to find out why. Ask your board. So I think a board assessment is really important in this process because you're going to need the board to lead this thing, right? So get their input right off the bat before you even get started with all these other things. And then I think an internal and external scan is really important. So what's the difference? What's the difference between a SWOT analysis and an internal or external scan? Anybody know? Okay, so a SWOT analysis is looking at your current state as an organization. How are we doing right now? What's our current situation as an organization? The internal and external scan is something that I consider to be future thinking. What do we need to be doing in the future the same, differently, or to stop doing? Okay? So they're very different as far as the questions, the types of things that you're asking. So this is current state, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. What's going on right now? And then the scan, okay, your external stakeholders, your internal stakeholders, that's about the future. And that's really important to ask them. That's a lot of information to gather, okay? So if you're going to do this on your own, you're going to have to appoint somebody who's going to coordinate all these assessments, create the questions for them, distribute them, collect the information, summarize the data, and give it to the Strategic Plan Committee and ultimately the board. This is why a lot of times organizations choose to have a consultant, because this is a lot of work to coordinate all this stuff. And do you have time to do it, by the way? How many people in this room think you have time to manage all those processes? You got this. So it's a question you need to ask yourself, is what I'm saying. Can you manage it on your own? And maybe you can. So that first 2 to 3 months is really around collecting data. The next phase, the next 3 to 4 months, is what I call discovery. So you're looking at your mission and values as an organization. When's the last time you've looked at your mission statement for your institution? Has anybody recently looked at theirs or reviewed yours? You have? Okay, good. What did you tell me about that?
We had created the mission statement only 2 years ago, so it's still very fresh.
Okay.
But sort of what we're feeling like is we want to make it more visible or more articulate better that we want to make the arts accessible to as many kids as we possibly can.
Okay.
In the surrounding area. And we think that piece is missing, so we were going to talk about that.
Okay, good.
But, distilling that mission statement down versus what the whole entire mission is,
Yeah. So thank you, Leanna. What I'm seeing is that most of you probably haven't looked at your mission or vision statement or created one yet in some time. And so the question you might want to ask yourself is, well, is it still relevant? Does it reflect what we're doing today as an organization? Does it reflect where we're headed as an organization? And so that's why I think it's really a good time when you're doing strategic planning to also review your mission and vision as an organization. And I find that many times an institution will update their mission statement because they find that either number one, it's kind of clunky, it's long, it's a paragraph, it's not relevant. You know, the times have changed in a lot of different ways over the last several years. And sometimes things within your organization, your institution changes. You know, we have to be adaptive and we have to be able to pivot as an organization sometimes to meet the needs of whatever we're trying to do. And so I find that this is a really good opportunity to look at that and help redefine the organization. One of the things I'll tell you about mission and vision statements is they need to be brief and they need to be easily remembered. Okay, here's my question to you. If you were to ask your board to recite your mission or vision statement, would they be able to? No, I see some heads going like this. No, most organizations can't. Okay, and that's kind of a problem, I think. Because if your board can't articulate what your mission and vision is, then this is the fundamental stuff here. We need to have a mission statement that the board can remember and say to somebody when they tell them, I'm on the board of Hickory Ballet, and our mission is to blank. You know, so it has to be memorable. It has to be something that just kind of makes you go, wow, and it has to be brief so that you can remember how to say it. Another thing that we do is we look at kind of some of the strategic issues that need to be addressed based on some of these assessments. So when we start summarizing all this stuff, then we start getting into some analytics around what are the issues that are popping up, what are some of the common themes and threads that we're hearing as we're going through these different assessments. And they will come up and you'll start going, oh, I knew that was going to come up. So we're synthesizing that data, we're developing a picture for the future, we're looking at what we're going to be bringing to the board as our recommendations for a board retreat and what are the critical issues that we're going to talk about. So that's where we come into months 5 and 6. We're developing the desired outcomes, we're looking at a 3-year financial projection, and we're actually writing the plan, the first drafting, and presenting it to the strategic planning committee. How do we do that? Well, all this stuff up here, these first 4 months of data collection and work is going to culminate into a board retreat, okay? And you'll probably have some of your staff leadership in that retreat as well to help identify what are the critical issues that bubbled up from these assessments, what are the commonalities, what are the themes or threads that are happening, and then how do we need to take those critical issues and turn them into actual goals for the institution. And that's where we do a lot of good work with facilitating with boards, is kind of putting all that massive amount of information and boiling it down into, okay, here are your top issues that you are saying we need to address. How do we turn those into goals for the institution? And then how are we going to attack those goals? How are we going to accomplish them? So once you get to month 6, 7, really that's when you're kind of finalizing the plan. The 3-year financial projection is really important because you can't just give a board a plan and say, here's our plan of action, here are our goals for the next year, without telling the board how much it's going to cost, all right? They need to be able to see a balanced budget. If you're wanting to add a program or expand a program, well, how much more is that going to cost? What year is that cost going to be? Is it going to be year 1? Is it going to be year 2 or all 3 years? Okay, how's that going to impact staff? Are we going to need to hire more people? Are we going to expand a role? What is that going to cost in salary, in benefits? Okay, all these different things that play into it. What I want to make sure you know is that a financial projection is not a budget. Okay, and I don't want you or the board to think, when you come up with a 3-year projection, that this is what we're going to do for the year. This is just a picture of what it might look like. It is your best guess estimate of what finances may look like for the next 3 years. But it's a really important component. I don't think you should have one without the other. You've got to have a plan, but you also need to know how much it's going to cost and how much revenue is going to need to come in to offset that cost, and how are we going to raise the money to make sure that we do meet that, okay? So towards the end of this process, what we're doing is we're looking at how do we establish a schedule for making sure that the board is reviewing this on a regular basis. We're presenting it to the board ultimately after some various number of drafts of the plan to make sure we're on target to get the board then to ultimately approve that document. And then we're going to launch it and we're going to get going on the plan, all right? So that's kind of on a high level, the process and how it runs. Your mileage may vary as far as how long it takes, but I think 6 to 7 months can be an aggressive target. John, you did strategic planning not long ago. Was getting it done in 7 months aggressive?
Well, I think we got done 4 weeks early.
4 weeks early?
Yep. So,
But it took all of it, didn't it?
well, I think some of it was the framework you had laid out, and then picking the right person to be the strategic plan chair, somebody who understood kind of critical path charts. Y'all were kind of a dream team. You teed it up really nicely, and I think that's important, what you described.
Yeah.
Making sure you have the right people in the right roles throughout the process.
Yeah, I can say personally, because I worked with John and the museum on their strategic plan, that John picked absolutely the best person to chair the committee. And so when you're thinking about your committee and who's going to lead it, it should be a board member. It should be somebody who is really going to manage the process and keep everybody on task. Because it's really easy for nothing to happen over a 30-day period if that person isn't helping manage that process and ensuring that we're meeting the benchmarks that were agreed upon. And you should have benchmarks that you're agreeing upon to make sure that things move forward, because otherwise, again, you'll lose the momentum. And when you lose momentum on a strategic plan, sometimes they never get finished. And then you've spent all that time and effort for what? So find a leader who's going to be really strong and is going to really do a good job making sure that you all have some benchmarks and you're moving forward to get the plan completed. Other questions about this? Yeah.
I'm going to be really careful how I ask this question because I'm the director and my board president is here.
I was going to say we're in the cone of safety here, but I don't.
She didn't know I was going to.
I'm very thankful, actually. This is great because I could never go back and say, hey, guess what you got to do? So, and I'm not going to say that he won't agree with me, but he probably wouldn't voice this. But it's concerning to me when you talk about the board needing to put this plan into place and choosing the right person to do this on the board. And you know, you're talking about having a working board and a governing board, and I don't know how all of the other organizations' boards actually work. We have the same 3 board members who, man, they're in it for everything that it's worth. They're hitting it, they're going to do it. And then, so I don't know, how would you even go about knowing who the proper person? Is it maybe something that we should pull a new board member in that has skill sets that maybe our current board members don't have? You know, I mean, maybe we don't actually have that proper person sitting on our board right now.
Mm-hmm. How many board members total? 15, but you've got 3 that are kind of your go-to. Yeah, that's not uncommon.
Yeah.
That's not uncommon. Board apathy is an issue in many nonprofit organizations.
This just seems like a lot of, I mean, it's necessary.
It is.
100%. And I can see like, you know, I'll be honest, we haven't had this. If we've had one, it's been, I've been in the organization 4 years in a different capacity. I've never seen anything like this.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm sure, have you ever heard of one in another organization?
Not in this organization.
Yeah.
Where I worked before, we had it all
Yeah.
the whole time. And that's another discussion for another day.
Yeah.
But I think it may start with the cold call to that prospective board member and say, hey, you know, this is not just to hang a tag by your name. This is something that we need to work on.
Yeah.
If you have a passion for it, whatever it may be, whatever board it may be, then we need you. And if not, I appreciate your interest, but
So
we need to pick someone else.
let me ask the crowd. You've heard the question of the situation in front of you. You've got 3 board members that are really strong, who are performing well, and you probably have a similar situation at yours. And then you've got 12 others who are just kind of there, showing up, you know, and you're looking for somebody strong. The question they ask, I want to put to the group right now is, should they identify one of those 3 people that are on the board as a potential leader of the strategic plan, or should they bring in somebody from outside that's not on the board yet? What do you think?
I think there's pros and cons to both scenarios. You know, someone internally that's identified already knows the organization, so when you talk about your SWOT, like, they could probably do that themselves. They could probably have the vision for the scan forward, but it's just a matter, as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking about other boards I've been on, past boards, and I've been on boards where there is a very engaged group and it's a working board, and I've also been involved with boards where it's just, hey, you have a tag by your name, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that there's almost maybe a conversation where some of the groups in here may want to leave this session and reevaluate board development in
Right.
general.
I think that would be the
Yep.
prerequisite,
Yeah.
Yeah.
because I think if you get someone from outside, that turns everybody off.
Well, here's my thought, and because I want to move on, we've got a lot of material to cover in about 30 minutes yet. Here's my thought. If you bring in somebody that hasn't been on the board and served, they better know your organization like the back of their hand. Otherwise, what value are they bringing to the process? And how are they going to answer a SWOT analysis? Or a stakeholder assessment, or a board self-assessment? They have no background or experience with the institution. My thought would be, find one of those 3, and you didn't mention that you would go to one of those 3 people, and there may be a reason for that. I don't know. But I would say internal, use what you've got. Find one of those strong leaders that is really doing some good work for you in the board, and identify one of those people. Because I think bringing in somebody externally, could be some benefits to that, because they bring some external knowledge, but they don't know your institution yet. And so how are they going to help you create the vision for the next 3 years? You know, that's my thought. I'd go to one of those 3 people. Anybody else have a thought on that? Yeah, I think, I understand, don't feel bad about your situation. This is not uncommon, okay? But, the first step in the process is identifying that person and telling them why this matters, why it's important. And we need you. Don't ask them. Just tell them we need you. Again, stop apologizing for what you need as a leader of this organization, and start telling people what you need to be a good leader in this organization. You'll get a lot more done, and they'll understand exactly what you're talking about and what you need. Don't beat around the bush. Don't ask them if they'd be willing to, or would you be interested in. Just say, we need you. You're the right person to do this. You're the right person to help us move this plan forward.
I think that's a difficulty of a lot of boards too, is finding people to serve.
Oh yeah.
Just finding people.
Yeah.
I think that's a challenge.
That's another workshop from Core Consulting. We do talk a lot about board development and finding the right strategic people, and that could be a whole nother conversation. And I love talking about that, by the way. So maybe we'll have to do another one of these things around board engagement and board recruitment, because that's a really important and popular topic. Okay, we need to move on, sorry. So what makes a good plan? So first of all, involvement. A good plan has people who are involved in it and are participating in the actual plan. That includes your staff, your board, your external partners, and your donors. You need to be asking and talking to them and involve them in the strategic planning process to ensure you're getting all the feedback. If you're just talking amongst yourselves in your little group, that's not going to help you as much as it is if you're asking a broad array of people and engaging them. So make sure you're involving a variety of people in the planning process so that you have a broad spectrum of input and feedback. Number 2, we want to assess. So I mentioned earlier, there are several different assessments that you can and should do. The internal SWOT analysis, again, current situation. Internal stakeholder, which is the future. What does the future look like? An external stakeholder assessment. Those are people outside of the organization. Those are those people in the community that maybe they know you and you'd like them to get them to know you better, or they're a public official in the community that has influence or understands the value of your organization. They could be a variety of different people, a church leader perhaps, or some other leader of the chamber of commerce. I could go on. You get the idea. You need some good, strong external stakeholders where you believe their feedback about your institution would be valuable and would help guide what the external population thinks about your institution. You'd be surprised at what you hear. Of course, board of directors need to be involved in the assessment. So doing a board assessment, I think, is really valuable. And then comparative analysis is, if you have the resources and time to do this, this is a really valuable lesson in how are other people doing this work, or how are other organizations that are similar to ours executing their plan. What are their priorities? What does their financial makeup look like? What is their organizational structure? What programs are they focusing on? Who are the recipients? Asking all these different types of questions can bring some really valuable data to you that you can bring back to the board and say, well, we talked to ballet in Charlotte, we talked to the ballet in Raleigh, and one in Georgia. And here's what we learned about their organizational structure, how they're raising money, how much money they're raising every year, all these different things that you can assess. So I think a comparative assessment is really valuable in this process because then you might pick up some ideas about, oh, well, I hadn't thought about that, or they're doing this, and this is something that we've talked about doing, but we've never been able to get it done. So assessing is really important in the process. It happens before anything else can begin. I think having 4 to 6 goals is plenty. That's going to be a lot of work because underneath that goal is going to be a lot of information regarding some measurable objectives and then all the tactics, all the ways that you're going to accomplish that goal. So there's long-term goals. There's the big, think about what the big picture is. Be forward thinking. Think about the future, the forward, and think about macro, not micro. Don't get down in the weeds yet about how you're going to do it. Just think about what your vision is for the future. But I don't think you need more than 5 or 6 goals. I really don't. Because once you start drilling down into that plan, there's going to be a lot of work to do for those 5 or 6 goals that you have. If you have more than that, they're probably misplaced. And I oftentimes find in this process that an institution that comes up with 5 or 6 goals, sometimes they end up with 4 or 5 because they realize that, you know what, there's some duplicity here. This really probably falls under this goal, and we don't need to have that delineation. Okay, but that's part of the vetting process that we go through with clients to make sure that they've got the right mixture. Another thing that makes a good plan is that your objectives are measurable. Okay, so the way I like to look at a strategic plan, your goals are up here. So, John, may I ask you, what is one of your goals in your strategic plan? Just high level.
We want to get to 675 members.
Okay, that's measurable, but yes, you want to grow membership, right?
Yep.
Okay, the objective may be, well, we want to grow it up to a certain number, or we want to increase by a certain percentage by this time, et cetera. Okay, so generally goals are, we want to enhance our fundraising program for the organization. An objective is, we're going to increase grants by 10%. Another objective would be, we're going to increase our annual fund by 15%. So you have all these measurable objectives, and then tactics will go under that. So objectives are measurable. There's a percentage growth, there's a specific number, or there's a date that you want to accomplish that by. Okay? So it illustrates growth, it identifies the timing. It doesn't have to do all of these. It's aspirational. Okay, it's, you know, I have a lot of clients sometimes who go, I don't know if we can do that. You know what? It's a plan. It's okay if you don't reach a goal. There's a reason for that. And I like people to be aspirational and think, you know what? If you're going to put down 1% growth, why put it down? You know, why not aspire to have 5% growth or 10% growth in something, and then try to figure out a plan to meet it. So that's just kind of my own personal thing. It may not be for you, but I like plans to be aspirational. That's what excites people. You want to push yourself. You want to push your team, right? You want to say, we can do this, and we will do it. Attitude affects altitude, right? Attitude affects altitude. If your attitude is we can only do 1%, guess what? You will do 1%, if that. But if your attitude is we could do 8%, and you tell your staff and your board, we can do this, you will do it. Lastly, objectives are tracked with the use of units, numbers, and figures. Okay, so you're going to track that by identifying how many or what percent. Okay, so don't forget, that's kind of what measurable means here in this illustration. What else makes a good plan are tactics that define the how. So we just had our objectives. We want to grow fundraising by 10% this year. Well, how are you going to do that? What specific tasks will you do? We're going to apply to our existing grantors, which are 20, let's say, just for example. But we're also going to apply to 8 new grant funding opportunities this year. Okay? So if you're not going to put yourself out there and say, we're going to grow fundraising and have a plan for how you're going to do it, it's going to be hard. But now you've set expectation. If you have a fundraising person, a development director in your organization, or if you are it, now you've identified how you're going to do it. Hopefully out of those 8 new submissions that you submit, you're going to get 1 or 2 of those grants. That's going to elevate your fundraising as an organization. So identify what the specific tasks are that you're going to be doing to achieve that objective. Identify the timing. When are you going to do this? Again, is it going to be year 1, year 2, or year 3? Remember, a strategic plan is a multi-year plan, and you can't do it all in year 1. Okay? So if you want by 2026 to have a total of 15% growth in fundraising, you're not going to do that all in year 1, right? You have to measure it out a little bit so that it's manageable, so that it's doable for your staff, okay? You need to identify who's going to do it. So the responsibility part is a really important part of this plan. So you need to identify, is it going to be the executive director doing that tactic? Is it going to be a staff member? Are the board going to be involved? Identify who's going to be doing that so that there's no question about whose responsibility it is. And you might have 2 or 3 people listed under that particular tactic. And then illustrate how you'll achieve the objective. Okay, so that's really what a tactic does. It really tells you the how of the objective. Here's an example I put up here for you. The goal is to enhance the organization's financial stability. That's the broad level goal. The objective, the first objective rather, and you will have multiple objectives under this goal, is to increase contributions by 10% each year. And then here's one tactic to support this one objective, is to cultivate 10 new foundations, funding, prospects, and proposals. And the responsible person is the development director. That's a very simple snapshot of what a goal, objective, and tactic would look like. Let me pause. Does this make sense so far? Any questions? All right, we're going to keep going. Don't forget to jump in. We've got about 15 minutes. So what makes a good plan? Board goal. I don't know that there's been any person that I've worked with, organization I've worked with, that hasn't created a board goal for themselves. So in other words, when you have a strategic plan, I mentioned earlier you're going to have 4 to 6 goals, right? My feeling is the board should have one of their own goals to work on. So they're not only managing the overall plan, but they're addressing some of the things that came up in that board self-assessment. And some of those things might be, well, our board is disengaged. Okay? Well, if they're disengaged, what's your goal? Somebody. To re-energize. Let's re-energize the board. Let's engage the board. Okay, so what's the objective then? How are you going to measure that?
Participation.
Increase participation of the board in blank by so-and-so. Okay, and then what are some of the tactics of how you're going to re-engage the board?
Throw a party.
Throw a party, have a social. Exactly. Thank you. Have a social. Let your board members get to know each other. At one organization that I worked with years ago, there were people that had been on the board for over a year, and some of the other board members still didn't know who they were. Come on, this is your dream team of people that are supposed to be helping move your organization forward. We must know each other, and we must know more about them than just a common passion for your institution. We need to know about who they are, where they work, what do they do, what are they passionate about, what's their family like, you know, where did they work, where do they go to school, all these different things. This is important, okay? Relationships matter in this work. And my experience has been working on the relationships with the board members was probably some of the most time-consuming work I did as a leader of an organization, but it was also the most valuable, okay? Because they're your advocates. You know, they're the people that are going to be able to help you if you are picking the right people, that is. So make sure you're investing that time with your board. Yes?
Is that something that not necessarily has to be included on the plan?
No, I think it should be on the plan, absolutely.
So actually make that a goal?
120% on the plan, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know if it was something that could be internal, you know, just among, say, the board, or...
If you let that happen, it won't happen.
Okay.
Don't let it, put it in, you know, they say if you put something in writing, it's more likely to be done. Yeah, it has to be in writing, it has to be on the plan, and there has to be some tactics about how they're going to do that.
Okay, so
Yeah.
include that then.
Absolutely, 100%, yeah. Yeah. Hey, if those close any more, it would be better,
Okay.
but
yeah.
if it
We're
can't.
about- well, I was gonna say we're at our break time, so.
Already?
Yeah,
Wait, I thought it was not 10:30.
10:15.
Oh, crap,
Yeah.
okay. We're done then?
For the first session.
Okay.
And then we'll have the.
Can I have 1 minute to wrap up?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I'm sorry, I thought we had till 10:30 and I was sitting there blabbing along. So as far as what makes a good plan, are you okay with going another minute or two? Because I really would love to get through these slides with you, and I'm sorry I have a tendency to talk on and on. So a good board goal outlines what's to be done and how it's going to be done with the board. It re-energizes the board. It gets, you know, if you're looking at how to re-engage the board, give them a goal. Give them something to work on. As a volunteer in any organization I've ever worked with, I just want you to tell me what you want me to do, okay? And that goes with the plan. Tell me what the plan is and how I can help you. I want to help. I'm a volunteer. I love your organization. That's why I'm serving on the board. Tell me what you need. And write it down, and then have the board chair lead it, own it, and hold people accountable for it. That's what your leader needs to do. And that sometimes can be a challenge too.
But I think knowing your board members like that may put you in a direction who you want to assign to someone.
Yeah.
To something. Then you know what their skills and weaknesses are.
That's right.
You know?
That's right.
Now, if you don't know your board member, then you're lost.
That's true. You got to get to know it's all about relationships. Don't forget, invest your time with your board, and your board will perform better. If you have an engagement problem with your board, then you have an engagement problem with your board. But if they're not engaged, that's also a signal that we're not doing enough to help them feel a part of our culture. Okay, and there are things that we can do to improve that. Okay, it needs to have a financial forecast. I already talked about this, but you know, it accounts for trends in spending. It estimates expansion costs. It gives your best guess estimate about future spending, and it informs the board before approving the plan so they know what it's going to cost and how we're going to get there financially. Really important. Gutsy but balanced. Again, be aspirational. There should be some risk involved. You know, it may push you a little bit outside of your boundaries, and I think that's good. I think it's good for us to push ourselves. It inspires your team. It inspires your board, your donors, your community. It's aspirational, but it's realistic too. And I know how important it is for it to be realistic. Okay? Bless you. So don't forget, it's got to be something that you believe you can achieve. And then lastly, you can't do it all in year one, like I mentioned earlier. It's measured. You are identifying your key performance indicators. Okay? You have some type of dashboard that you're measuring it with, that the board likes and approves or helps create for you. And you're monitoring it regularly. Rather, the board is monitoring it regularly. And I recommend every quarter. Okay, I think that's a good benchmark. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it's the board's body of work. Here's an example of a dashboard. I know you can't read this, but I just wanted to put something up. It'll be in the slides. You'll get a copy of this entire presentation when we're done, okay? So you'll get to see an example, but here's a great example. Here's revenue expenses over here. The green is expenses. The blue is revenue. Okay, so revenue's coming up there. We're gonna make it. We're gonna make it by June 30th. Here's the actual different programs, you know, as far as revenue goes, from grants, events, corporate support, individual support. These are all the different things. Here's budget, actual, and everything. This is just a good example. And then highlights from development, highlights from marketing, communications. It's a nice little dashboard. I know some of you probably already have one that you're using, but I just wanted to throw that example in there. So here's what you need to get started. And we're really wrapping up here in just a moment. You need the consensus and support from your leadership. You need to identify your committee members and get really good people. Spend the time and invest the time and take your time to make sure you get the right people on your committee that are really going to perform, that are going to contribute, and that will be there. Like, I mean, really be there for every meeting and participate. It's really important. Who will do it? Are you going to hire an expert? You got to identify that. You need to identify your timing and what the finished product is going to look like. And you need to communicate it. When you're done with your strategic plan, the next thing you should do is go on a communications blitz. You should go back to every stakeholder you talk to externally, and you should show them the new plan. And you should have a face-to-face meeting with them, and you should thank them for the contributions they made and the input and feedback they gave you so that they can see what you did. Why does that matter? It's relationship building, okay? These are key people that were important to you during the planning process. The least we can do is deliver back to them a message that says, here's the result of the feedback you gave us. And here's why we appreciate you so much. Here's our new plan. We're really super proud of it. We're really super excited. And I want to thank you in person for helping us get here. And then put it on your website. Go to HMA's website and look at their strategic plan. It's big and bold and beautiful for everybody to see. You need to shout it from the rooftops when you're done with this, folks, because it was a lot of hard work. You put a lot of effort into it, and you want people to know you have a strategic plan. It is something to celebrate, I think. And people need to know that you have it. Why? Because it enhances your credibility, and that's important in our work. People need to know that you have a plan. You're not just doing things willy-nilly, right? That's it. Any questions or things that I can tell you before we go to break?
Excellent.
Thank you. Really, what questions do you have? We've got another minute if you want. Does this help you get where you need to be? What do you take away from it today?
It's kind of relieving if you want to know the truth. It takes a lot of pressure off of me being a new director, interim director actually, because we don't even have a solid director yet.
Yeah.
It puts a lot of responsibilities here on the board. I just need to work with my board a lot closer. I love that you said, stop apologizing for telling
Yeah.
me what you need.
Yeah. Good. Thank you all. We're going to come back later, and I'm going to have a worksheet for you. We're going to do a little bit of an exercise that I think you'll find helpful. Thanks, guys. All right, so for the next 30 minutes, we're going to do a little bit of exercise, a little work, and but it's going to be your work. And so I've given you 2 sheets. I'm going to ask you to look at the one that says worksheet, let's see, may I hold this up? It's this guy right here with the big open boxes in it, okay? And so I thought it might be helpful for you to start thinking about what strategic planning would look like for your institution. So we're going to have some quiet time, I guess you could say, so that you can give some thought to this particular worksheet. The other one I'm not going to have you complete it right now unless you have time and want to, but I think it's another really good tool for you. So let's start with, let's see here, let's start with this worksheet, and I'm going to see if I can close this a little bit more. That's a little better. Okay, cool. So the strategic planning process worksheet is, I think, a really good exercise for us to start with, and for you to start with as far as thinking about what you want to do with your strategic plan. So what are the specific strategic questions or issues that our organization wants to address during the planning process? And you can see there's 2 columns, okay? On the left-hand column, it is what are your long-term issues that you think need to be addressed. And so what I want you to do is I want you to frame it as a question, okay? And I'll show you that in just one moment. On the other side is what are our near-term focus areas. So are there some operational questions that need to be addressed in the near future? And if there are, what are they, okay? So I want you to go ahead and start working on this. And I'm going to give you plenty of time to do this, all right? So we'll take about maybe 5-10 minutes for you to go ahead and start working on this. And then we'll get back together and I'll start talking to you. We'll answer some questions you might have about this. While you begin, I'm going to write an example of a long-term issue up here. And I'm also going to write an example of a short-term focus issue that you, just to illustrate how it might look for you. Okay?
This is a question format.
The left side is.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm just going to interrupt you for a second. I know you're working, but I wanted to give you an illustration of what a long-term issue, a strategic issue might be. So I wrote down here, how can we maximize the involvement of our board of directors in raising necessary resources to support our work? Okay. I created this one because I thought this is something that may be very relative to a lot of you, and you might actually want to write it down. But this is just a good example of what a long-term question you might be wanting to ask about strategic issues. I'll put an example of a short-term one in just a moment. Okay, just another example for you. This on the short-term column on the right side. So I just wrote down an example. We have 3 board vacancies. So again, short-term, this is right now. And in addition, our board is not very involved these days. So that could be an example of, I see some heads nodding and smiles, but this could be an example of a short-term issue or an operational issue that you need to address. Another short-term could be something to the effect of, we've seen an increase in staff turnover in the last year or 2 or 3. It could be one of many things. That's more of an operational issue that you might want to address. I'll give you about 5 more minutes to work on this, and then we'll talk about it. One more example for you for long-term. Are we offering services in specific areas because of historical reasons, or because those are where the populations we are serving have the greatest need? And just another example of a question you would ask yourself about your long-term or future vision. I hope that helps. How's it going? Are you coming up with anything?
Plenty, actually.
Plenty, actually. I'm looking for anybody who'd be willing to share a long-term issue, question that they're asking themselves right now. And if you don't answer, I'll pick you. Hey, John.
How can we create a sustainable funding sources absent an endowment campaign?
Everybody hear that? How do we have a sustainable funding source?
How can we create sustainable funding sources absent an endowment campaign?
Without an endowment campaign? Okay. Do you all know what an endowment campaign is? Do you want me to go ahead and tell you what that is? Why don't I, just in case? So an endowment is something that many nonprofits have and many don't, that can be used as a corpus to help support the organization's operational or programmatic type funding needs. So some institutions have multi-million-dollar endowments, and you're allowed to draw a certain small percentage of that in order to cover some of your operational costs, okay? Usually about 5%. So I think John's question is, how do we continue to sustain the organization without having one of those? And maybe the question is also, should we have one, right?
Well, I guess that has to do with, the time. So you do your legacy campaign, you get the commitments, and then you wait. And you wait for something you don't want to happen, which is somebody that cares about the organization to pass.
Right.
So what do you do in the meantime?
Yeah.
To, sustain a growth trajectory.
Right. Something that ensures the stability and sustainability of the organization. Yeah. Endowments are a tricky thing because typically most nonprofits create an endowment when they have additional dollars that are not geared towards a specific program or need at that time, and they can put it into a fund. Not very many nonprofits have those extra dollars laying around that they can do that. But they often do come in, John mentioned, when somebody dies. They often do come in when somebody includes your institution in their estate plans as a beneficiary. And so all of a sudden you have a $100,000 check on your desk that you didn't intend to have or know what you're going to use it for. The key is, do you have a gift acceptance policy in place at your organization that directs you as to what you are to do with that money if it comes in? So the way that endowments are most commonly created and grown is through an unexpected gift, like a planned gift from somebody's estate, okay? So if you don't have a gift acceptance policy, you should create one immediately, because that will guide you in how you use those dollars. If you don't have one, then the board could decide, well, let's buy a van, or let's invest in this, and that may not be strategic to your mission, but it may be tempting also. I've seen institutions where there wasn't a gift acceptance policy in place, and a major gift like that came in, and they used that to cover their budget for the year. I get it. I think it's really better if your board agrees on and decides a specific policy for how you're going to use those gifts. And most commonly, they are written in the gift acceptance policy as a gift that would be directed to your endowment, okay? That's how you grow your endowment. There is also something called an endowment campaign, where you ask your supporters to make a gift specific to the endowment in addition to their regular annual giving. Not instead of, but in addition to. The problem with that is that most donors do not really care about endowment funds. They want to see their money in action now. They don't want it to be in this account where a little bit of dollars trickle out to help pay for a part of a person's salary. It's just not exciting to them. It's not interesting. They want to see their dollars at work now in most cases. Do donors give to endowment campaigns? Yes, they do, but not nearly as effectively as they would to your mission, to your program, okay? So I don't know if that answered or helped you as far as that particular issue, but endowments are something that can help with your sustainability. They're very difficult to raise money for, and therefore most organizations do not have endowment campaigns. If they do, they make it part of a capital campaign where we say, you know, we need to raise funds for the museum because we're going to add on this exhibit space, and we need to invest in storage, and we need to invest in that. And by the way, 10% of your gift to these things is going to be directed to the endowment. And the reason that that's a good thing and you want to do that with your gift is because it's going to help ensure the long-term stability of the institution so that we can continue to grow and be less dependent on donations. So that's the way you would typically pitch that. Yes?
So I'm curious about the format up here. You've done questions under long-term and then short-term situations. So I'm assuming this is filled out ahead of any kind of planning, real planning.
Yeah.
So my question is, why are the two formats, and then how do you use the information that's gathered from the different participants?
I think, well, how you use the information, and there's not a big rhyme. If you want to phrase this in the form of a question, you can. I just think sometimes when you're thinking about long-term, it's easier to ask it in a question format, but that's just a personal preference. As far as how do you use it, I think this is all part of your conversation with your leadership as you're building up to or looking at convincing your leadership that you need a plan. So this is an exercise that you could do on your own, but I would encourage you to do it with your board so that they can kind of self-select and understand, oh, these are issues that we need to address, and maybe a strategic plan would be a good idea. It's always better when you make it their idea.
So if they've already decided they want to have a strategic plan, this could be still helpful
Of course.
as far as shared information before
Yes.
they start creating the plan.
Absolutely. Yeah. Good question.
But that can kind of segue into the gathering phase
Yes.
to begin the
Yeah.
process.
It can start before you even have your committee together. You know, get that initial feedback. One of the most critical things you want to do is keep your board engaged in this process throughout the process, however many months it takes, okay? Because you're going to have this subcommittee, if you will, this strategic planning committee, which may or may not represent the entire board, probably not in most cases. And so you've got to keep your board involved so that your board is going to stay involved by participating in some of those assessments. The board assessment is going to be one thing they're going to do. The internal stakeholder assessment is going to be another thing they do. The SWOT analysis will be another thing that they'll do. So, and then communicating back. The committee chair needs to be communicating at every board member, or rather every board meeting, what the status of the strategic planning process is to keep them engaged and make sure that they're part of that. So yeah, that feedback is always critical, I think, and you can do that before you start. Yeah. I'd love to hear from some of you guys in the back there what you wrote down for a question, if you don't mind. Yeah. Go ahead. I'll let you go first.
Sonny, what did you ask for, long term or?
Long term, yeah.
Oh, I'm looking at the wrong one.
On the left side.
Okay, so we're kind of just starting. So one of my long-term questions is what processes and responsibilities should be delegated and elected in the future? Because right now, we're doing everything, all the processes, all the programming, all the projects. But in the future, we won't be able to do everything and keep scaling and sustaining. So we need to start thinking about the particular responsibilities that we're delegating.
That's a great question. I think probably we could all write that question down. Thank you for that example. Because, if your vision is to grow, at some point you've got to decide, well, I can't do all this by myself, right? Who's going to do it? Is it going to be a volunteer? Is it going to be a board member? Is it going to be more staff? If it's more staff, how are we going to do that? If it's going to be more volunteers, how do we do that? Who's going to be responsible for recruiting them and managing them and training them? Volunteers are unpaid staff. You got to do all those things just like you would for a staff member. You have to onboard them. You have to train them. you have to manage them. And volunteers are a lot of work, right? If you have board members, you know what I'm talking about. So it is. And we love our board members because they are giving their time. But I think that's a great question. It really is. And this is the same as if you were creating your business, and that's on the other side of the wall there. But if you've ever created a business plan, you have to identify what are the needs of the organization and who's going to do the work, right? So that's a great example. Yeah, you had one also.
Hi, I do. I'm going to be relocating, as I shared with a few of you earlier, to the coast of North Carolina soon, and heading up the Arts Council of Carter County. And so when I interviewed with the board, I think it was some members of the executive board, and not everybody, but it was about 5, and they were all white, and they were very concerned, and I was thankful to hear this. How do we engage the community of members of color? Because I did not realize total population, only about 9% are color, and of that, less than 5% are African American. And so I've come up with my personal thoughts and some things to start engaging in. Unfortunately, I've been active here, being in the public schools previously and involved in African American Church and education liaison with the NAACP here in Hickory. But I'm going to a whole new place, and I don't want to frighten people with being too assertive and too strong, but I also want to make sure that the talents and the art of children through seniors of all the communities of color have an opportunity to be seen, to be heard, to express, and to share. Because there's been no celebration of cultures, and to teach the children of the diversity of our country and the world. And so I know that's going to be an objective for me. And I'm interested in hearing feedback that maybe will help me.
Is it? Yeah.
I was going to, we're the Insomniacs out of Iredell County, and what you're doing is exactly what we do. So maybe we could talk to you.
Oh gosh,
Hey, yeah.
Bless you. Love that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think being intentional about, I love to hear what you're saying. It's really refreshing to know that, we want to be intentional about this. I'm wondering, just even stepping back further, how does that impact your current mission statement? And does it? And does your mission vision reflect that, what you just said, because nobody should be afraid of that, right? And the way you start breaking down those walls and those barriers is that you start communicating, this is our vision, this is who we are, this is what we stand for, and it's important that we engage all populations.
They expressed to me a little bit of their fear, as we have a lot of workshops going on everywhere with DEI, and but they had a fear. They said, "Would you be okay?" I went, "Yes."
Yeah.
Because they haven't even heard a gospel choir sing. So we're going to, there's going to be an awakening.
Love it. Is anybody else facing this challenge in their institution? And a lot of people. And how are you addressing it? Or do you have anything to share that might be a help?
We're actually the first. Iredell County was facing the same issue, a similar issue as well. So we established the first Black-owned, minority-owned organization, nonprofit organization, that was really the mentorship of the executive of the Arts Council. So I particularly went and done a spoken word that was an open mic night. My brother went and done a spoken word that was an open mic night. In connection with the executive director of the Arts Council, we met, talked, had conversed, and he advised that I start a nonprofit. Because of my educational background and my credentials. He assumed that I'd be good at grant writing and I could get us funds to post shows and do things, and then even help him fulfill his mission and help him spend some of his dollars. That connection kind of put a battery in our back as an organization to do the things that we needed to do to get in this space, because we were looking for this space, we were looking for these opportunities. It was really big on building relationships with the members of the Arts Council, and then even the supporting of the organizations around the Arts Council. But a lot of it was education as well, so I was meeting with the director, the executive director, and he was walking me through the process of how to organize, start an organization, the filing fees that I needed to do, all of my tax documents, all those things he's walking me through. That also encouraged me to keep going. So now we're established, man. We just got awarded our first grant, so.
Congratulations.
He held my hand, he walked us through the process, and then I had a conglomerate or collective of artists and individuals who were showing up to the shows. We were able to create a mission together and kind of help solve the issue together while we're educating ourselves on becoming an organization, a functioning organization. So the opportunity and the education for us as Black and brown people, we feel that is an opportunity for us to learn and then be at these type of tables and be in the environment. So,
Yeah. Fantastic. Congratulations on your grant. Yeah, that's a great start. Folks, I know that I'm going to get dinged any second here because we're at 10 till. So I just, oh, see, yeah, right, yeah, boy, wasn't that timing. We're not going to have time, as I mentioned, to go through this other worksheet, but please take a look at it and use it however you feel is helpful. It's really around, it says a case study for County Legal Aid Society. This is an example that I pulled out for you. I think it'd be really good. And, you know, this kind of helps you set up for the conditions that are going to make you successful in strategic planning. So try to answer these, yes, no, or unsure. And if you have a bunch of no's or a few unknowns, you know, look at those, address those, and figure out what's the obstacle and what do you need to do to address that before you launch into strategic planning. And this, too, is something that you could share with your board of directors, okay? So I've enjoyed my time this morning. Thank you for participating and getting involved and talking and sharing your ideas and your questions. My contact information is here. My business cards are up here. If I can be of additional help to you, please don't hesitate to reach out. I love talking. I do.
Would you come to the coast?
I sure would. Yeah. You got a beach place I can stay at? Maybe we can work on something, right? Yeah. No, this has been great, everybody. Any questions? Okay, I sure will. Any other questions? Are we done?
We are going to open the walls back
Yeah.
up and then do question and answers and share
Oh,
some
okay.
other resources.
Let's do that.
So
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, thanks. My pleasure. Yeah.
I mean, see if they're even there.
Thank you, guys.